Okay, so first of all, let me introduce myself because I see a lot of different names. My name is Larissa. I am the president of the University of Stavanger SPE Student Chapter, and I am the chairperson of Women in Energy in University of Stavanger. This event today was organized by our Women in Energy team in the university, and we are very, very happy to have all of you today with us. Our lecturers, they will talk a little bit more about themselves, but our lecturers today are going to be Shauna. She's the SP 2020 president, and Yogashri, she's 2020 also, Women in Energy International Chair. I believe they have a lot of experience to share with us, and I am more interested in listening to what they have to say than me. So I'd like to explain to you. I sent you through email, but how is this going to work? We're going to have 1 hour of lecture. Every lecturer will have 20 minutes to talk a little bit about themselves, what are their career paths, and then after these 40 minutes, we will have 20 minutes of questions and answers. So if during the presentations you have any questions you'd like to ask, just write in the chat. And then in the end, we will have these moments. The presentation is being recorded. We will upload it on YouTube after. So if it's okay, I would pass for the lecturers. Shauna, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd love to. First of all, welcome. You guys actually gave me an excuse to put on makeup, which I have not put on in about 3 weeks since being in self-quarantine. So thank you. And also too, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending what part of the world that you are calling in from. I actually was. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I'm assuming you can.
We hear, but maybe someone has the mic on also. Now it's better.
Okay, excellent. I was supposed to actually be coming to Norway in June to do my tour and visit both the sections and the student chapters. And unfortunately, because of our current world situation, that had to be postponed, but I still fully intend to come to Norway during my time as SPE president. So I've had the pleasure of speaking at women in energy events all around the globe. And what I will tell you before I go into my own personal history is that challenges and barriers are different depending, for women, are different depending what part of the world you're at. So a lot of my comments and my story may be relevant to those primarily in the Scandinavian countries, or it might not. First, my history, I am a 30-year member of SPE. I am a Canadian. I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is not known to be an oil mecca. Far from it. Actually, there's a lot of people that are very anti-oil and gas where I grew up. So it's unusual as to how I ended up to be a petroleum engineer. And again, you can pretty much do the math. When I said I was a 30-year SPE member, you can pretty much do the math and figure out exactly how long ago it was that I was in university. And I actually went to university to become a doctor. And it wasn't until I was 2 years into the pre-med program, I realized that it was not my goal to become a medical doctor. It was more of my mother's. And I started to spend quite a bit of time with those in the engineering department and realized that's really where my passion lied. And when I had the chance to look at all the different types of engineering, petroleum interested me the most because I had a love of geology. I grew up in the mountainous regions of Canada, and always had a love for geology. So that's how I ended up in petroleum engineering. When it came to the percentage of women in the engineering programs in Canada, it was a lot higher than what I've seen, for example, in the United States. Some of the engineering disciplines were almost 50-50, women to men, primarily in mechanical engineering and chemical engineering. But I was the only girl in petroleum engineering. But again, you have to, the numbers were considerably smaller. There was only 14 of us in my graduating class in petroleum. And so, you know, being the only female, that's pretty much on par. By the way, for SPE overall, the global demographics of women members that we have is 17%, by the way. So anyway, when there was also a different movement that happened in Canada too that affected women in oil and gas when I was in university, and it had to do with the Polytechnique massacre that happened in Quebec. For those that are not familiar, in an engineering school in Quebec, Canada, a male student took it upon himself to enter a civil engineering class. He made the women stand on one side of the room and the men stand on the other side. And then he brought out a gun and he slaughtered the women engineering students that were in that room. And in total, 12 women lost their lives. And what that did was it created a shockwave throughout the country. And this male student said he did this because he really felt that women did not belong in engineering programs. And what that did for all the engineering schools across Canada and even into the oil industry, it really put a focus on areas where there were a lack of women in certain programs. And so there was a huge push to increase numbers. And so, for example, when I graduated, a lot of the oil and gas companies were really pushing hard to increase the number of women engineers they brought into, not only into the companies, but they put instant expectation of inclusion in the workplace. So again, my path, it was a lot, I think Canada was several decades ahead of the United States with this, but unfortunately it came at a price of 13 women losing their lives to create change in Canada. So anyway, okay, we'll put that was a kind of a black moment in kind of the earlier start of my career. But then when I came into the oil and gas industry, I realized that there was a huge importance of working in the field, having that field experience, because I knew that, you know, I wanted to go up the technical career ladder. And I knew that to have not only credibility, but also the deep knowledge that I was going to need to have, I pretty much had to get my start out in the field. And I had 3 job offers when I graduated, and 2 of them were in offices, and the third one was sitting rigs, completion and workover rigs. And even though it was really out of my comfort zone, I grew up being, and I still am, a girly girl. No, the thought of day in, day out wearing coveralls and a hard hat was quite foreign to me. But again, I knew that where I wanted to end up, that was an important step that I needed to have. So I actually was a rig supervisor for about the first 3 years of my career. And also what that did was, if I pulled equipment out of a well, I followed it to the shop and witnessed its teardown. So I became very knowledgeable in the inner workings of what we have. And I will tell you, that decision to go out and get my hands dirty and work the rigs, that opened up many doors for me in the future. And the one thing I do see with women coming into our industry, women tend to turn down roles like that more often than men, not realizing that those decisions you make earlier in your career really does end up closing doors for you later on. And what I mean is, for example, half of the C-suite roles that are in our industry pretty much require you to have had some sort of deep knowledge, whether it's out in the field or in a plant, on a offshore platform. And, you know, if you hadn't got that experience early on, and again, too, it's also difficult for women. I made sure I got this field experience before I wanted to have a family, because I knew it would be extremely difficult, especially with rotational schedules and working 12-hour rig shifts, that it was going to be hard to raise a family. And then I turned to SPE, and I used SPE to make, not only to gain that technical knowledge, because I said I decided earlier on I wanted to be industry expert in artificial lift, but I also too, it's sometimes hard for us as women to voice our achievements, or that kind of expression is toot our own horn. And I used SPE, mainly publishing papers, to get my name out there and to get recognized for what I can contribute. Interestingly enough, I never published, I have about 25 papers, and I never used my entire first name as an author. It was always just SG Noonan. Again, too, because I didn't want people to automatically have that bias as to whether I was a female author or not. And about 10 years ago, when I was in Australia, I ran into a fellow from BP, and he says, "Oh, Shauna, you're with ConocoPhillips," because that's who I was with at the time. He says, "Man, can you introduce me to Mr. Noonan, because I've been reading his papers, and man, he knows a lot about artificial lift." And I had to tell him, I said, "No, that's actually me. It's I'm Shauna Noonan." And he was quite surprised, because again, there was that bias that I was actually a male author. Fast forward, I knew also too, I wanted to have a family. There is never a right time to start a family, except for myself. I had a goal. I wanted to have my first child by the time I was 30. And around this time, this is actually when I had been transferred to the United States with Chevron to work in their corporate engineering group. And, you know, being on expat assignment, there was kind of an unwritten rule that, you know, you shouldn't be doing maternity leave and having children during this time. But again, I had my own goals. So while I was on expat assignment, I had both my children. I now have a daughter who will be 21 this year. She's studying actually computer engineering at Michigan State. And I have an 18-year-old daughter who will be off to college this fall. And I will tell you, it is tough working in this business. Well, it's probably tough working anywhere. Again, trying to be the best engineer you could be, as well as also being the best mom. And one of the things I had to learn early on is that you can't be perfect at everything. So, you know, there were times where I had to buy the birthday cake as opposed to spend time to make it. You know, there's the little things give and take, because you can really burn yourself out easy by trying to be best at absolutely everything, especially when raising a small family. Anyway, fast forward through SPE and through my publications. Actually, ConocoPhillips, how I ended up at ConocoPhillips was they had reached out to me through a lot of my publications, and they asked me to come over, and they actually offered better work-life balance for me, because Chevron was really pushing for me to travel a lot with raising a young family. And I came over to ConocoPhillips under the agreement that I would only be away from my family on a weekend one time in an entire calendar year. I also was very upfront with them that I will start work at this time and I will leave at this time. And I guarantee you I will be just as effective as my male counterparts who basically burn the midnight oil, and because I needed to have that work-life balance. I actually took a 30% pay cut to come over to ConocoPhillips, but getting that work-life balance was very, very important to me. And then how I ended up at Oxy, I was on a panel at an SPE conference, and there was a vice president from Oxy that was in the audience and actually offered me my dream job to run all of artificial lift globally, and to come over to a company where half of the engineering chiefs are female, as well as having a CEO, Vicky Hullum, who is a female. It was very inspiring to me, and I've never regretted it. But again, to the decisions and that get made earlier on in your career, a lot of time it's difficult to go back and correct. And so anyway, that's, like I mentioned earlier on, my career path might not be necessarily relevant to you. Times are different. I know when I first started sitting rigs, they were not used to having women out in the field locations. So, and sometimes the shacks that we would sit in, the treatment vans, would be covered with pornography as wallpaper. And those were kind of challenging times. But the way I handled it then was because it was my decision as to what crews got to come out, and I would just kind of ignore what was around me and complete the job, and those crews would never show back on my location again. And then when their management would come to me later and say, how come you don't hire us anymore? And then that's when I would tell them, and then that's when all of a sudden the pornography wallpaper started to disappear in field operations at that time. So I mean, I've talked more than my allocated time. So now I think I will turn it over to Yoshi to tell her story.
Larissa, while you're putting that on, morning, afternoon, everyone. I'm Yogashri Pradhan. I work as a reservoir engineer for Endeavor Energy Resources out in Midland, Texas. So for those who have never been in Texas before, I mean, people joke about Midland or West Texas being the middle of nowhere, but it's where a lot of the activity is in the Permian Basin. And Larissa, I'll let you know when to change the slides. So a little bit about my background. I knew I wanted to do engineering when I was in high school. I was in a all-girls engineering camp that was hosted by a local university that was around the school district living in. And we had a session where there were engineers from different disciplines around the Houston area. They sat down with us, young high school girls, and they were just telling us about how, or the benefits of being an engineer in the industry. Some of them happened to be in the oil and gas industry, and that's when I learned about petroleum engineering. And I had that major in the back of my mind. So I also did speech and debate in high school, where there would be public speaking competitions, and part of the objective is to keep up to date with current events. So I learned about the business side, or had a high level overview of what the oil and gas industry looked like. So I combined my passion for math and science. I heard about petroleum engineering, and then I learned about what the industry was like when being on the debate team. And when looking into universities, when I was a junior or senior, I learned that there are universities out there that have petroleum engineering as a major. That's when I decided that, okay, well, I want to be a petroleum engineer. I was also a part of my high school's, there was a program where they offered internships, or they offered mentorships for people that were available to give their time to some of these high school seniors. And I was a part of it. My mentor at the time happened to be in the oil and gas industry, and he provided me my first internship during my last semester of my senior year of college, and then during my summer semester. or right before I entered university. So I had some exposure to the oil and gas industry at the time, and I knew I wanted to continue that momentum. But since then, I was involved with SPE at my university chapter. I was also involved with SPE before I entered UT, or the university that I graduated from. And I knew from early on that my involvement in SPE was going to be very beneficial for me, or I knew that I had to make use of it because I met a lot of people from that professional organization. Larissa, do you want the next slide? Great. So I already talked about a little bit my personal experience. Go to the next slide. So I talked a little bit about my personal experience before I entered university, and about my experience and couple that with my volunteerism with SPE, because I want to share with you all my experiences and to give you an idea, or to have you be a little bit aware as far as what kind of opportunities might be out there for you in locally or regionally or internationally from SPE. So I graduated in 2015 at UT with my Bachelor's of Science in Petroleum Engineering, and I listed all the organizations that I was involved in. I knew I wanted to be involved with SPE, and then I was also involved with a Women in Petroleum Engineering group, and during my senior year. I was very involved with the student paper contest. I competed for years at university, and I also was a captain in my Petrobol team at my senior year. So after I graduated, I started working for a company called Energy. And Shauna mentioned a little bit about making sure that you get your field experience earlier on. And I heard about that quite a bit when I was in university, about how a lot of women that were at my peer level, they were offered office internships, or they were turned down field internships because they heard a lot about how those experiences or those internships were very female friendly. And I've had a lot of my friends, they weren't very sure, or they were very reluctant to accept those field internship offers. But because I heard a lot about how very few women were offered those field internships, I knew I wanted to take on a field internship when I started with Devon. And when Devon had their rotational program, they make everyone start in the field. So I chose that. I wanted to be a production engineer in the field, and Devon gave me that experience. But working in the field, it's hard to go downtown in Midland, or it's when you're 2 hours away seeing rigs. It's hard to attend SPE events, especially when not many of them are live streaming or video streaming. Most of them are in person. So I wanted to continue my SPE involvement by finding opportunities. And I found remote opportunities from being a part of the editorial staff from The Way Ahead. And I created content by working with people from around the. I also was a co-founder of SPE Cares. So that's a volunteering initiative where people who conferences, or whether if it is ATCE or any technical conference, inviting such a large population, it'd be interesting to give back to that same community and improve the image of what the oil and gas industry looks like, or improve the reputation of the industry, because we get a lot of criticism about how we are not socially responsible, when in reality, that's part of most of our company culture, or that's our objective. I mean, we're the same folks who are using the environment as everyone else that's outside the industry. I mean, it would be foolish that we don't put that as a priority. Next slide. So fast forward, after working with Devon, I moved back to Houston, and I worked for a group called University Lands. So this is a organization that oversees a lot of the royalties that come from operators that produce in the Permian Basin. There are these lands that are dedicated to University of Texas and Texas A&M University, and these 280 operators would produce from these lands. part of that revenue or part of that royalty goes to funding UT and Texas A&M. So Texas Oil and Gas Institute was a technical organization that supported university lands, and I worked as a production engineer there. Being in the Houston area, the Gulf Coast section is extremely active, and the SPE has a huge presence in Houston. So I wanted to make the most out of that. I was involved with numerous committees in the Gulf Coast section, such as Members in Transition. I was a part of a multiple study groups, such as the Permian Basin Study Group. I was involved with many community service initiatives to improve my networking and also my engagement in the community. And Shauna talked about putting your name out there. I knew from earlier on that putting your name out there, such as through a publication or presenting, I took advantage of that. From the student paper contest, I had my first publication, or when you have the opportunity to present in the international portion of the contest. And then when working with Texas Oil and Gas Institute, I made an effort to publish at least one paper a year, or at least have a one speaking opportunity for a certain period of time. So I took advantage of symposiums and conferences to improve my visibility and to also improve my technical skills, because you retain 90% of the information that you teach. Next slide. So after working for Texas Oil and Gas Institute, and when the oil price in the United States are improved a little bit, I wanted to take advantage of working for an operator again and working in an area where there's a lot of activity, which is why I'm here in Midland. And if you've heard a lot about the Permian Basin and reservoirs that compete with the Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia, I mean, you hear a lot about improvement in drilling activity. And I had a lot of classmates that moved up here, or had their companies move up here, because they were increasing their presence, or they're increasing their operations here. So that's how I ended up moving to Midland, and I started working for Endeavor. And I've been working for Endeavor for about 2 years as a reservoir engineer. The additional benefit working for Endeavor and working in Midland is that while I am working in the office right now, it's really easy to go to the field for me, so I can hop in my vehicle and head out to the field to see what kind of operations are happening. So it's very, very convenient over here, just so I can keep abreast of field operations, or a field of what's going on. But I made sure to maintain my SPE involvement. It gets a little bit you have to learn how to balance your SPE involvement with also your work, and also with your personal life. And fortunately, everyone else in the Permian Basin section is dealing with the same kind of balance as you are. And there's a large young professional population. When I started out in the Permian Basin section, I worked as a program co-chair, and then I continue to publish and participate in conferences. Mostly it's participating in conferences or presenting locally, just to maintain my technical skills or retain the knowledge I just got when I'm learning something new. And then of course, giving back to I try to give back to student initiatives in the section. We're very active in an initiative called Energy for Me. So it's teaching those outside of the oil and gas industry, our younger kids, about the oil and gas industry, and how this natural resource is very integral in everyone's daily lives. We have a supporting section, or supporting student chapter is Texas Tech University. So we support that student chapter when it comes to their Petrobol initiatives, and when it comes to their student activities as well. And then now I'll be chairing the Permian Basin section this year. So in most of our board of directors are young professionals. I think everyone at least that I know around the section understands how important it is to maintain their network, and SPE has been very helpful for, at least when I speak to the young professionals that are on the board with me, that it's been very helpful for them, and they've been able to improve their engagement and their visibility with others. Next slide. So I'm not going to go into every single bullet point here. I presented this at the ATCE Pavilion 2 years ago at the Dallas ATCE. So if you want to go ahead and read that a little bit or very quickly, but I'll just mention a couple bullet points that any level of work experience. So I worked for an operator and then I worked for a government agency. It can provide value to others. And if you have some difficulty attending SPE events in person, and I think all of us do right now, considering the pandemic, try to find remote volunteering opportunities. So that's contributing to the Way Ahead, or SPE Connect has their volunteering portal. Feel free to sign up for those. There are various opportunities. There's something that's posted every day. And then for me, personally, giving back has been very rewarding for me. And I've mentioned before, I retain more knowledge when I present or when I'm actively applying my skills. Next slide. So next slide. So this is for those that are, if you're going to graduate really soon, but those are a few networking opportunities. I'm not going to go into every single bullet point here, but for this essential skill is more important now than ever. And it's a little bit difficult considering that we're all going to be doing this remotely, but I've heard of people getting Zoom interviews or video conference interviews. But if you have the opportunity, try to attend one event or one webinar, and in this case, every week or every other week, if you're and that's especially if you're job seeking. And make sure you practice your elevator speech. So that should be about 30 seconds, a little bit about yourself, like who you are, who you're affiliated with, and what you're interested in. And ask questions, and make sure you show that you're engaged, or make sure you are engaged at the event. So make sure you ask questions, and make sure to have your business cards, of course, or you can always make your business cards, even though you as a student, you can also make your business cards as well. And then I'm guilty of this as well, but you meet a contact, make sure you follow up with those contacts about 24 hours, 24 hours and at max 1 week after an event. Next slide. And the one thing I do want to point out is usually when you're networking, it's a little bit hard that when you are searching for a job that, you want to ask for something, you're asking for advice, you're asking for an opportunity. But the most effective way of networking from my personal experience is asking of what I can contribute or asking how I can help that person. You are more likely to develop a very good relationship or establish a relationship if you ask to offer something as opposed to asking to get something from somebody, because that way you present an opportunity for yourself to apply what you can do, and you pretty much challenge yourself that you have to hold yourself accountable to contribute. So I talk about getting started, or I talk about this is just an example of how I got started, and I mentioned about the various committees. Members in transition. So for those that are searching for a job, I was involved with the committee in SPE where we hold seminars once a month, and the speakers that we recruit talk about networking skills, how to start your own business, how to start your own consulting firm. And I know we're planning to web stream the members in transition series. There should be a starter's kit on the SPE website if that's something that you're interested in, or if you know that your section might be interested in. And then I talk about, I met with a contact almost every single day when I was job searching. I spoke at a networking workshop for other members in transition. So I showed that I was able to offer something before I can ask something in return. And then I made use of all sorts of SPE resources, such as short courses, there are free webinars, and there are other educational opportunities that are out there too. And I know that there's a huge push for attending SPE webinars right now. So I suggest you all to make use of those SPE webinars during this time. Next slide. So for those that are graduating, and if you're seeking employment, of course, professional involvement is more important now than ever. And I do want to let you all know that you have to let SPE know that you are in transition, and SPE can waive those membership fees up to 2 years. And I mentioned about the SPE members in transition kits. They are available online. I don't remember where in SPE you can go ahead and check that. I think there should be a tab somewhere. I do remember that. And then of course, put yourself out there, like volunteering committees and study groups. And it's a lot more efficient to do that now, considering that you can do everything since we're forced to do things remotely. And then I say work on your professional contributions almost every day. I say that as time permits, because if you are in transition, I mean, your job is finding a job. So taking advantage of those professional organizations and making sure that you're holding yourself accountable to your commitments in those professional organizations will translate very well to a job opportunity. Next slide. And for those that are, so chapter to section involvement, go on. So for those who are officers, so Larissa, I know you're an officer, you chair Women in Energy here in University of Stavanger. And for your team, I hope this might be very helpful. Make sure you keep active contact with companies and supporting sections, as well as other student chapters. Feel free to communicate with your department and supporting section contacts. So for those that if you have professional contacts that have graduated from your university, make sure you keep close contact with them. And then of course, have students attend professional events, keeping you all in the loop, or make sure the section keeps you all in the loop. For the general student population, or for you all, I found it very beneficial to participate in Petrobel because that was a stepping stone for me to learn about some fundamental technical skills before I started working full time. It forced me to study because I was competing in a competition. And then I attended SPE student meetings, or make sure you attend SPE student meetings with the company representative attendance. Make sure you attend professional section events, and then keep close contact with your faculty members even after when you graduate. The opportunity I learned about Texas Oil and Gas Institute and university lands, when I left Devon, I immediately contacted one of my professors from university, and she took a picture of a business card of the boss that I had at Texas Oil and Gas Institute. And I landed an interview within a week, and that's how I landed my opportunity. So you never know which faculty member may be in the know as far as opportunities go. And that comes from other alumni that keeps in contact with their faculty. That may or may not be applicable to you all, but leave that open as an option. Next slide. And then I mentioned about current professional members. It's very similar. For those that are about to graduate, this is something that you ought to keep in mind. I found it beneficial to give back to the universities and giving back to student initiatives. And I've always found opportunities of improvement to improve the relationship between a section and a student chapter, asking student chapters how to support them, and then also identify opportunities improvement with the section. So energy for me has been a great opportunity for us as a Permian Basin section. And then we made sure to increase corporate participation at SP sponsored conferences. Next slide. And I just listed all the student opportunities that are there for you all, that if you haven't taken advantage of them, these are just a few that have helped me. And I'm just like letting you know this is not an exhaustive list. I just listed the first few that have helped me starting out. I've been in the industry for about 5 years, so I've been a pretty active young professional on the local, regional, and the international level too. And I'm looking forward to talking to you all as well. Next slide. I think that's it. And then these are just a list of opportunities for young professionals. So there's a young member engagement committee. On the volunteer portal, you can find that if you want to sign up for that. There's a leadership conference called Emerging Leaders Alliance. So every year in Virginia, in the United States, there is a multi-society conference that you can sign up for, and SPE can select you as a delegate to attend that conference. Most of that will be paid for, but you learn a lot of leadership skills if you don't have any internal training at your company. And then, of course, there's the SPE certification based on various petroleum engineering disciplines, and I talked about courses and webinars. And if you haven't already, make sure you're involved in the e-mentoring program or provide feedback for the e-mentoring program. Next slide. I think that's it. So I gave a brief presentation on what I gave at the ATCE Pavilion, but I tried modifying it to where hopefully some of these takeaway messages are helpful for you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you for the presentations. They were really helpful. We're gonna now open for questions. First, I'm gonna ask one of the questions that the committee prepared. Any one of you could answer this. The question is, what do you think about initiatives like Women in Energy? Do you think they help with turning the oil and gas sector more gender equal, and how?
Okay, well, let me first respond. So the Women in Energy, when it was sanctioned by the SPE board, its goal is not just, it's not gender diversity, it's diversity overall. So that includes gender, cultures, geography. So again, just to preface it, and the program was created to provide a venue for both women and men to get together. And it's nice knowing that you can actually go to an SPE WIN event and perhaps not be the only woman that's in the room. You know, it gives us a place to gather. But again, the mission of it is not seeking gender neutrality. It's just diversity overall. Yoshi?
That's a good question. I wanted to join Women in Energy because I was asked this question a couple months ago in an interview where I appreciate the platform that organizations like Women in Energy do provide. And as Shauna mentioned, that it's meant to be diversity for all, not just focus on gender diversity. But I do think that organizations like Women in Energy provide a platform for visibility and provide a platform to for people that have a similar interest or have a similar calling to be in the same group and provide webinars or provide and provide speakers. So I really do appreciate it as a platform, and I do think that the only thing that I really am looking forward to is how do you apply that to corporations. That's where we need to have the application for companies that truly make a difference. So if you have diversity and inclusion managers, or if you have people that are very influential in their organization be involved in those kinds of platforms, that's when I see a difference can be made. But I start or as a platform, I think Women in Energy and similar organizations are very important.
Right, and it also gives us a chance to talk about topics that normally we would not within other SPE events. For example, one of the talks that I give when I travel to Women in Energy is on self-sabotaging behaviors and self-imposed ceilings, realizing the impact of behaviors, and some behavioral traits are more unique to women. A book that I reference quite a bit is called How Women Rise, 12 Self-Sabotaging Behaviors that are typically seen more in women that tend to hold us back. And I really wish I had bought that book much earlier in my career. And there was moments reading it where I'd have an epiphany because it completely described what I was doing. And I'll give a few examples. One was, typically when I go into a conference room or where a meeting's being held, I'll typically just take a seat at the back and not a seat at the table. And that's a trait that's called minimizing. And the people that get seen and heard are the ones that are sitting right up front at the table at the front of the room, not the ones hiding at the back. So again, you know, if you want to be heard, you also have to be seen. And another trait too is typically with women, we have a lower level of confidence in ourselves. So typically we'll wait until we meet 100% of the qualifications of a job, or like we feel we have to have everything in the box checked off before we'll approach for promotion or a pay raise. And men typically don't do that. So what we do with kind of our low confidence in ourselves, we end up holding ourselves back in a lot of ways. So, and that's it, and it's topics like that and discussions that Women in Energy allows us to have. And I will say though, even because I've had a chance now to manage both men and women, and even reading that book and the behaviors, again, those behaviors are not just unique to women. I've also seen it in men too, and it's actually held them back from either being placed on a team or getting that promotion. I think we're ready for the next question.
Yeah.
I just would like to tell everybody that is in the meeting, if you have any questions, we prepared some, but you can ask in the chat in this Teams meeting, and then we can use your questions too. Our next question would be, in the company you work or previously worked, what is the proportion between women and men? And do you think this proportion is changing in your region with the years? And if they are changing, how are the companies trying to pursue these objectives? Like what are they doing to change it?
Like I mentioned earlier on, a lot of this is regional. And a lot of times it's cultural. I'll give an example, for example, in the Middle East. And I've seen it personally within my own company where there is an even number of male and female engineers graduating from the universities. But once they enter the workforce, based on traditions, typically, if I want to bring, say, for example, a young Qatari female to the United States for training for several months, tradition is we have to ask her father if she's not married. And if she is married, we have to ask the husband. And typically, we will get a no. And also, too, in some of the areas that we operate, once a woman marries, it's expected that she quit her job. So we're, there you have an even proportion coming in, but, and there's a saying, it's tradition trumps company policy. So you can have the best policies and inclusion in a company, but again, depending on the cultures and the religions, we end up losing a lot of the women. Also in certain parts, depending how it was impacted during the last downturn, obviously we lost a lot of both male and female during the last downturn, but while the men came back into the industry, we did not see a lot of the women come back. So we have what they call a hollow middle now. And that's going to affect us years down the road, because then if there's a low percentage of women in the middle, that's when it comes to the next CEOs, CTOs, the C-suite, there's probably going to be a less likely chance to influence those upper numbers because of this hollow middle. Yossi, do you have anything to add?
Sure. So I work for a smaller company in that we don't have, actually, to be honest with you, we don't have too many women engineers. So I'll speak from a university perspective, where when I started out at UT, we had about 20% of our incoming freshman class as female, or that were female for petroleum engineers. The number increased a little bit when I graduated, so that was around 30%. And I do think we increased our initiatives, to be honest with you, with UT had outreach events for engineering, or for STEM, for women in STEM. I'll say that. And as Shauna mentioned, that it does depend on the region, and it does depend on the culture of where you are. So I can't speak for every company to say that I see that there's an increasing number of women. what I will say is that there are more initiatives to encourage women to pursue engineering, or to even retain them in the industry. I've heard that even when I was graduating, that within the first 5 years like females are more likely to leave years of employment, females are more likely to leave the industry because of family commitments or some cyclical nature of the industry too. But
now I see there's a question that's kind of related to this that I want to get to, and it was posted by Karen. And sorry for the noise in the background. Today's garbage day, so the garbage trucks are going past my house. And it's, do we see more bias for women to be laid off during this time?
yeah.
And I wouldn't say there's a bias, but the one thing that I see is, again, they're going to keep the employees that are providing the most value. And the value is not, oh, I had 5 goals this year and I completed all my goals. It's more of, you got to talk to management in dollars and barrels. And when I tour around, I ask people in the room, do you know today the value that you're bringing to your company, and put it in dollars and barrels? And it's typically the men that know that number, and not necessarily the women. Because again, it's not because you show up for work every day and you did maybe 9 out of 10 goals for that year, but that possibly that one goal that you did not do was the one that was going to be adding the most dollars and barrels to your company. So again, and Yoshi mentioned like the elevator pitch inner speech. And the one thing I always say too, it's so important to know that value and make sure, well, also too, if you don't know what value you bring, I bet you your boss does not know the value that you bring. And when you have 30 seconds in an elevator with an executive manager, it's not one of those, hi, I'm so-and-so and I work in so-and-so's group and, how was your weekend? It's, hi, I am Shauna Noonan. Just thought I'd let you know that last month I managed to save the company $30,000 and added 10,000 barrels of oil to the company's bottom line. And it's that thing you get remembered for. So again, it's not necessarily a bias, but we need to not only start understanding what value, or make sure that we are bringing value to our companies, but making sure we're messaging it out so they know. And again, they'll keep the ones that are bringing the most value.
That also goes into what you would put on your resume as well. Like, you don't just talk about your tasks, you talk about what monetary value that you brought to your previous company, how much money that you saved. So I mean, for me on my LinkedIn, I worked as a development engineer where I put together AFE packages, for instance, and I talk about how much those projects were worth, or how much the rate of returns or the value that you realize. So make sure you add dollars, or as Shauna mentioned, dollars and barrels to the work that you've done. Yeah,
and now the fact that we're at home, or even too for the students that are getting ready to graduate, I always make sure that I carefully plan my goals, and also too when I mentor. And I reach out to a lot of young women that I mentor, and I always make sure that one of our main sessions is at the beginning of the year to help craft goals that are actually really, you can put a dollar or a barrel amount to it. And then, those common checks throughout the year, making sure that we're staying focused on the value adding and making sure that gets messaged out.
As we are almost running out in time, I think there's a question here that would be very good to ask. This is for both of you. Which advice would you give to a young woman pursuing a long-term career in the petroleum industry?
You go ahead, Yoshi.
The advice that I would give to a young woman pursuing a career in the oil and gas industry, I mean, I've given this answer before, and it would be, I'm going to say it's the same advice I would give anybody, like a male or a female. Just know why you are joining the oil and gas industry. It's times like these during the downturn where a lot of people realize that they joined the oil and gas industry. And I'm not speaking for everybody, but many of them join because of the money, or because of the high salary, or the high risk or high reward. But The time is the cyclical nature of the industry can really test your stamina, or they can test of what exactly are you passionate about in this industry. So just make sure you know why you are joining why you're joining the oil and gas industry. Make sure you have a passion that is greater than the monetary value, or a passion that's greater than some of the perks that a company can give you. Because most of the time during your internships, the company shows you the rosy side of their organization, and they're really doing that to retain you and to make sure that they're taking care of people that they're taking care of those students. Another thing is, when you're joining a team, and especially trying to evaluate offers, make sure you understand that company culture, and make sure that company culture aligns with your values, or the company's values align with your values. Because in a glimpse of how teams are structured, and it can give you a glimpse of if this is going to be a supportive environment that positions you for growth. And it's hard to do that when you're evaluating offers, but when you're entering your internships, or when you're talking to your professional contacts in those companies, you can start asking those kinds of questions on how do you feel working over there? How are the teams work? Or how do the teams, what's the team dynamic? Or and I would also say ask a female in that company if you can. Ask a female in that company. And I would also say ask a woman of color in that company too.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. First, there's the soft skill side, and then there's kind of the technical side. Again, have confidence in yourself, right? And don't be afraid to ask questions. Again, too, that sometimes I see a little difference between men and women, and be open to criticism, and don't, especially during the mentoring process. Mentoring will only work if you're open or receptive to the constructive feedback that is being given. And it's not done to, again, don't take it personal, it's for your own development. And I know that's one thing personally for me, that was hard when I was starting, because I get a bit more of a sensitive person, and I did take stuff a little personally. Just confidence, be open to feedback. And then now on the technical side, also start understanding the financial part of our business, because again, that it doesn't only help you personally, but it also helps you understand, for example, the situation we're in now, and with the cyclical nature of our business, and the global economy, it really helps you to understand what's going on a lot better. But also too, it makes it easier to converse with upper management, because that's something that they know. So don't hold off in your career with understanding that side of it. And you can get that within the SPE. A lot of the SPE materials that we have, or even kind of gravitate through some of the ones we have, a business and a management leadership technical section, where they're providing a lot of this information and tutorials. So, and then now to put the Scandinavian perspective, that's probably the one part in our business that I've seen that has really made the work environments, especially offshore, a lot more inclusive to women. Norway was one of the first areas where they had proper living quarters on offshore platforms for women. And up until maybe a few weeks ago, the only CTO that I knew of in this industry was a Norwegian engineer from NOV. Unfortunately, now they've named a new CTO. She's no longer, I got to check up with her and find out where she went. But for those that are in Norway right now and in the Scandinavian countries, you've actually, things are actually been made easier for you longer, being a woman in this industry. And I think we're pretty much at the end of time. I'll turn it back to our wonderful moderator.
Yes, I just want to add something that was in that question. This is more specific for us that are already working in the Women in Energy. We are starting the Women in Energy program here in Norway. So we'd like to know from you, from SPE International, how can we improve our work and make better impact with women in energy here since we're starting.
So I'm more than happy to connect you to our sections and chapters subcommittee chair to start that communication. And, we're coming up with the best practices of what sections and chapters can do for women in energy events. So I am more than happy to connect you to our subcommittee chair for that. And then, and the way that we will know as far as what other sections are doing or what other women in energy activities are doing, making sure that others are in the know from like improving the social media presence, or if you want to write an article about your section or what activities that you've done or what a recent event that you had, feel free to contact the way ahead as well. So improving the visibility, and then I can share those best practices for sections and chapters with you.
And be open to inviting people from human resources departments, and especially the men. And this is for 2 reasons. Mm-hmm. And when I travel to some of the bigger women in energy, probably about 25% of the people in the room are actually from human resources, because they want to understand how they can start increasing inclusion and start understanding some of the issues and discussions that are going on within women in the technical roles. And we're seeing the men come in because they want to understand how they can be better managers of women. There was a study that I referenced that came out several years ago, and it looked at 1,000 male managers, both in the UK and in the United States, and understand how well they supported and managed the women that work for them. And one of the major conclusions was the men whose wife also was a working, was either a working spouse or a working mother, they tended to better support the women in their own organization. So we use women in energy to kind of get this message out across the board, both the men, the human resources, the women. So when you're planning and your events, just be wide open and talk about absolutely anything.
Okay, so finally, on behalf of the SPE UiS Student Chapter, I'd like to thank our 2 speakers today. I believe this discussion was very valuable. I learned a lot. And we will share this video after in our social medias. Thank you so much for participating. I hope we get more opportunities to talk and have more events together.
Thanks to everyone. And
thank you so much.
Hope to see you in person once everything all settles down and we open our borders.
Yeah, you should try to come to Norway. We would be glad to have you here.
My mother's side of the family's Norwegian. Her maiden name was Carlson, so I'll be coming back both for business and personal.
Yeah, that's nice.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much, girls.
Bye.
Bye.
Ha det bra.